Well, welcome if you're online. It's good to have you with us this morning, and Happy New Year to you all. Oh gosh, it's worn old already, fine. I thought Emmanuel had woken you up. Happy New Year to you all. That's better, great. We're starting a new kind of series this morning. If you get your emails on a Saturday and you read the whole email, you'll have discovered that we're going to begin to look at John chapter 13 through 16, which are the passages where kind of Jesus is sharing openly from his heart on his way to Calvary. And so much of what he says in these passages are both about him pointing us to the cross, but also about him speaking into our lives as disciples of Jesus Christ. So we're starting with John chapter 13. For many of us, if we're familiar with Bible stories and Jesus stories, this is a familiar one because it's a story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. So we're going to have a look at that as we begin this new series this morning. So John chapter 13 and verse 1. It was just before the Passover feast, and Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he'd come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel round his waist. And after that he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I've done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I've set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent me. Now you will know these things. Now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them." So reads God's word. I'll never forget a moment when I was a sixth former at Ripley St Thomas School. That's just up the road for those of you who are not familiar with Lancaster. I came to school for 7 years here. And I had a very good friend, Nipper Lee. His name was, that was his nickname. He wasn't named Nipper, his real name was Michael. But Michael was a great sportsman. We did A-level woodwork together. I got to prepare for the ministry on the back of A-level woodwork. But I remember talking to him one weekend, so I was about 17 at the time, and he was telling me what he'd done that weekend. And I had this amazing realization that he had a life apart from me, that he had a life that was very different to mine, And suddenly I realized that actually I wasn't the center of the universe. Now, some of you might have said, well, that's fairly obvious, isn't it? But for me, up to that point, then kind of in my head, in my heart, everything revolved around me. But suddenly I realized that Michael Lee, and that meant others, had a completely different life apart from me. I wasn't the center of their universe, and I wasn't even the center of mine. Now, you might think, well, what's that got to do with this? Well, you'll think about it in a moment. I'm also going to tell you the story this morning of somebody called Gregory. Gregory lived nearly 1,500 years ago, and he actually became a pope. So he was the leader of the then known church at that time. Now, a couple of things about Gregory, and then we'll pick up his story later on in this message. Gregory was known, he was known as the servant of servants. So whilst he was kind of the head of the church, that was his name. That's what he was known as, the servant of servants. And about 500 years ago, so 1,000 years-ish after Gregory, one of the great reformers of the church, a man called John Calvin, actually called him the last real pope. Now we'll pick up on his story in a moment or two, but the servant of servants. When we come to this passage, Jesus kind of says to his disciples, look, you call me Master and Lord. And that is right. That's who I am. But I want to tell you, I've just shown you something powerful, something that you need to take into and on board in your lives. I just knelt down and I've washed your feet and dried them. And I want you to understand this, that that's who you have to be in my calling for you as followers of Jesus. And as we begin this year, the biggest thing I want us to go away with is that do we have that servant heart that Jesus had, that flows out of who he is, to touch our lives and change our lives into the kind of people that he longs for us to be. When we look at this passage, there's a few things just to pick out. First of all, it says that he knew his time was come. It was Passover, the time for the annual sacrifice, where the people sacrificed a lamb to take their sins away. There's no mistake that Jesus went to the cross in Passover week. All the symbolism, if you will, came from that sacrificial picture and became the reality that when Jesus died on the cross, he took our sin away. The wrong that we are and the wrong that we do, he took that from us on the cross. So it's beginning of this passage as we're kind of, if you will, pointing through this spring term towards the cross. It begins with pointing to the cross. It was the beginning of Passover week. Jesus knew his time would come. He knew that he would return to the Father. And it says, and now he showed them the full extent of his love. Well, there's one sense in which showing the full extent of his love pointed right to the cross. But there's another sense in which it pointed right there, right then, to him kneeling down and washing his disciples' feet. Wow. The full extent of his love was to pour himself out as a servant to his disciples. And another little thing to pick up is that, and I can just imagine, I don't know about you, but I don't know whether you like your feet being touched or not. I live closely with somebody who for a major part of my life, that if I touched her feet, I knew what would happen. It would be violent. Okay, right? Just could not stand. It took years before I was allowed to massage my my wife's feet. And the only way you could do it was to get some nice foot cream and start to rub it in gently, and then slowly, Catherine got her feet massaged. But I still get threatened that if I touch them too lightly, I'm going to get kicked. So, but I can feel the disciples, their their kind of embarrassment, looking at each other. Should one of us have done this? Where are the servants who are waiting on? Shouldn't they have done this? We've got dusty feet because we've been on the road. We've been on dusty paths, and it was a fairly normal thing to have your feet washed. And as Jesus is going around the crowd, you can the room and getting nearer and nearer Peter, you can feel Peter's feet almost kind of crawling up under him. and he's like, he's not going to touch my feet. He's not going to wash my feet. I'm not going to let him do that. He's my Lord. He's my master. He's not going to wash my feet. So when Jesus finally gets to him, he's like, the big question, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? In other words, he's saying, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet. I'm not going to let you do that. And Jesus said, I need to, Peter, because if I don't wash your feet, you don't have a part of me, with me. In other words, if you don't allow me to serve you, you can't be a part of me. Wow. Wow. Unless you receive my serving you in this humble way, Peter, you can't be a part of me. And typical Peter, his immediate response, he just blurts out, Lord, give me a bath. Give me a bath, and I want to be part of you. Give me a bath. And Jesus says these beautiful words, Peter, you're already clean. It's just your feet. Now, just as a little aside, I want you to know, if you've come to the Lord Jesus Christ, if you've received him as your Savior, if you know that he's forgiven your sins, you are clean. You are clean. Forgiven, clean, you stand right with him. But sometimes the day brings its dirt. All right? Sometimes the day brings the dust of the world, the dust of our brokenness into our lives. And we need to get back and kneel at the cross and just ask for our feet and our hands, our head, our heart, to be washed again. You are clean, but as a daily practice even, as part of my daily ritual, routine with God is, I draw a little cross at the top of my journal, and at that point I say, God, will you please forgive me for anything that I've done or anything that I'm not aware of that I've done, and I just want to be right with you. And please keep me from temptation today. So I draw a little cross with my fountain pen at the top of my page before I write anything else. So just that thought, you are clean, but sometimes you need your feet washing. Okay, but let's move on. So Jesus then washes all their feet and Peter's feet, and then he gives this great teaching where he says, you call me teacher, you call me Lord, and that's right, because that's who I am. But you've got to know that my heart towards you is that I've come as a servant. In Mark chapter 10 and verse 45, and Jesus said these words, that even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. He also wrote or said these words, greater love has no man than this, then he lays down his life for his friends. In other words, Jesus saw, as he pointed himself very, very clearly to the cross, saw that this was an act of service for the whole of mankind. And the Apostle Paul, writing to a church in Philippi, wrote these words because he kind of sums it up very powerfully in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 5. Your attitude, in other words, Paul's saying our attitude should be the same as of Christ, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing. The original language there actually has this sense of emptying himself out. He emptied himself out, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant and being obedient even to death on a cross. So the whole of Jesus' life was God emptying himself and stepping into this world to be a servant. Now, he then says these words, I've set you an example. There is one church tradition, it's called the Lutheran Church, which again came out of the Great Reformation 500 years ago. And they actually took this to heart. This morning, we're going to be obedient to Jesus by celebrating what we call Holy Communion or Sacrament or the Lord's Supper, taking bread that signifies his body broken, drinking wine or grape juice that signifies his blood shed. The Lutheran Church practices foot washing. So they actually have a ceremony where they believe Jesus said, you have to do this. So they get down on their knees and they wash each other's feet in a foot washing ceremony. Because they believe Jesus said, this is it. And for them, Holy Communion is a sacrament. Also, foot washing is a sacred thing to do. But he says, I've set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. No servant's greater than his master. In other words, if I'm going to get on my knees and wash your feet, then we need to do that. We need to get on our knees and wash our feet. And I just want to kind of bring this home a little bit in the sense of we live in this incredible world that is amazing, but so much of our Western world is all about me. And I began to realize it wasn't when I was 17 and I was at school and found out that Nipali had a life completely apart from me and I wasn't the center of his universe. It was devastating. Not just kidding. It's a realization that hit me then. And I know for many of us that's just part of growing up. And that was about the right time for me to realize that. But actually to realize in a world that actually says, no, you are the center of the world. You are the center of your universe. And all this is about you becoming the you want to be. So we're given my choice to be who I am. My choice to be who I am sexually. My choice to be who I am in how I conduct myself, my life. My youngest daughter was sharing that she'd been speaking to one of her work colleagues this week and saying that a work colleague had asked her about her Christmas and she said, my Christmas was just basically just being drunk, because that's the real meaning of Christmas, isn't it? And Carrie said, actually, I spent most of my Christmas going to worship. And why? Because this world is all about me. It's all about actualizing yourself and becoming who you are and in a greater way than ever before. And I just want to say that if that's the kind of life we live, if it's all about me, my rights, my way, my holiday, my life, my ambitions, my choices, it's all about me becoming the me I want to be, I want to tell you that's a downhill road to depression. It's a downhill road to self-destruction. Because the selfishness that we build into our lives becomes so centered around ourselves that when we find there's nothing at the bottom of that hill, then we're bereft, we're lost. And all I want to say this morning is that the best way of us becoming who we're really meant to be is to discover what it means to be a servant. Here's some studies from a massive survey done in the noughties in Japan. And the study was actually called the Counting Kindness Intervention Program, right? And they found that happy people are more extrovert, they're less neurotic, and they scored that happiness was one of the key factors in subjective well-being and overall satisfaction with life. How did that express itself? 1, it created a sense of belonging and reduced isolation. Volunteering and helping others helps us feel a sense of belonging, makes new friends, and connects us with our community. Face-to-face activities such as volunteering at a food bank can help reduce loneliness and isolation. So it creates a sense of belonging. 2, it keeps things in perspective. Many people don't realize that a different perspective can help their outlook on life. Helping others, especially those less fortunate, can put things in perspective and make you feel more positive. There's evidence that being aware of your own acts and kindness and the things you're grateful for can increase feelings of happiness, can increase your optimism and your satisfaction in life. Doing good may have a more positive outlook on your circumstances. Third point, it makes the world happier. It's contagious. Acts of kindness have the potential to make the world a happier place. It can improve happiness and optimism, and it encourages others to repeat the good deeds they've experienced themselves. Next point, the more you do for others, the more you do for yourself. The benefits of helping others can last long after the act itself, both for you and for them. That's just a brief summary. I kid you not, just click on Google, the great source of all knowing, and ask it, what does servanthood and what does kindness produce in me? You will find thousands of studies like that. And you might say, well, they didn't need to do a survey to do that. I kid you not, you have to do surveys. This world works with surveys. It works with data. Just joking. And you might say, well, it's obvious. Yes, it's obvious. But actually, when they begin to look at it really hard, they find that the happiest, healthiest people are those who are not trying to actualize themselves. They're actually seeking to serve and be used in this world. Peter, who said, you're not going to wash my feet, got it. And you know he got it because when he wrote a letter to other Christians, or 2 letters to other Christians, this is one of the things he said. He was speaking to leaders in the church. He said, be shepherds of God's flock that's under your care, serving as overseers, not because you must, but because you're willing, as God wants you to be. Not greedy for money, but eager to serve. Not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade away. Peter got it. He said, if you want to be a leader, you need to be an example. If you want to be a leader, don't be greedy. If you want to be a leader, it's not about your ego. If you want to be a leader, it is about you serving other people. So when he wrote to other Christians, years after Jesus had gone back to heaven, he was able to write that. And I wonder when he wrote those words, was he thinking about the time Jesus got knelt down and washed his feet? Let me read to you about this Pope from nearly 1,500 years ago. So this is a little book called, it's written by a monk called Bede, A History of the English People and the Church. And it's fantastic because it shares how Christianity took a hold in England and the British Isles around 1,000 to 1,500 years ago. And some of the stories in it are so powerful. Now, Pope Gregory had a passion for England. You might have heard the story that one day a pope was walking through the marketplace in Rome and he saw some people, and particularly some children, for sale in the slave market. And he saw some of them, and they were white-haired and blue-eyed. And he said, well, they're just like angels. Who are they? And he said, well, they're angels from England. And he said, well, they are like angels. And that somehow triggered in him an absolute passion to see Christianity take a hold in England. And so he sent one of his best men, a man called Augustine, who was one of the most brilliant church thinkers and leaders, and he came to England, and along with his guys, they began to preach the good news to kings, and they began to see God working in England. And if you will, there had been a wave of Christianity through the Roman Empire, but the one that really took a hold was then when Augustine came on Gregory's behalf. Listen to this of Gregory. So when he died, whilst he wasn't part of the English-speaking peoples, Bede did want to put a chapter in about Gregory and who he was, because he felt this guy had such an impact, he's worth a mention. Much might be said of his imperishable genius, which was unimpaired even by the most severe physical afflictions. For while other popes devoted themselves to building churches and adorning themselves with gold and silver, Gregory's sole concern was to save souls. Whatever money he had, he bestowed zealously to relieve the poor, in order that his righteousness might endure forever. Like Job, he justly claimed, "When the ear heard me, then it blessed me. When the eye saw me, it gave witness, because I delivered the poor that cried, and the fatherless, and that him that had none to help. The blessing of him that was ready to perish came on me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy." And then it says, among his deeds and kindness, it also finds a place that he saved our nation from the grasp of the ancient enemy by the preachers he sent to us. He was full of joy at the conversion and salvation of the English, as he mentions with fitting commendation in his own commentary on the book of Job. This is what he writes. The tongue of Britain, which formerly knew only the utterance of barbarity, has some time since begun to cry the Hebrew word, Alleluia, to the praise of God. The once restless sea lies quiet beneath the feet of his saints, and its ungovernable rages, which no earthly prince could tame by the sword, are now quelled at the simple word of his priests in the fear of God. Heathen nations who never trembled before armed hosts now accept and obey the teachings of the humble. For now that the grace of the knowledge of God has enlightened them, and his heavenly words are received, and miracles too are published abroad, the fear of God restrains them from their former wickedness. In these words, Gregory proclaims that the holy Augustine and his companions guided the English nation to knowledge of the truth, not only by their preaching, but by display of miracles. And so you can read on about Gregory for a few chapters as Bede kind of gives a fairly long obituary to this Christian who served. But that's only an example. Down through the Christian ages, again and again and again, Christians have been notable for their self-sacrificing servant-heartedness. And we need to come to the table with that as we begin a brand new year. There's just kind of three things, and it's a bit corny, but they all begin with T. What will you give? What can I give in 2024? I can give my time. One of the things I can do is just give my time and give myself up to serve. That my time is not my own, to have my holiday and my way, my TV time. It's not about that. It's what can I give? How can I give my time up to make sure that it's not all about me and mine. It's about me serving. So maybe a prayer for you to go away with and say, God, can I give time? Some of you are, and you do amazingly. And you turn up and you serve. It's brilliant. Can I give my treasure? At the beginning of February, Jamie and I are just going to be talking together with you a little bit for a few weeks about how we can give and how our giving. You know, every year we do okay financially, but we just about scrape through into the red. We'd love to get to a place where in our giving we kind of just feel this sense of freedom and release into the ministry that we know God's called us to here. But can you give? Maybe you've never thought that giving could be a way in which you serve. But would you consider that? Some giving forms available at the back. There's a QR code. You can click and set up giving online. But just leave that with you to pray about. Then also your talent. What can you do? Some of you might be brilliant with older people. Some of you might be brilliant with children. Some of you might be brilliant with young people. Some of you might be brilliant getting stuck into Bay Volunteers or Olive Branch Food Bank. What are you good at that you can say, I'm going to give? A long time ago, we had a great pianist who led worship here, John Layton. He's still part of us, and I know he still plays piano, and he was brilliant. I just loved it when he got into boogie. Occasionally, the old man got let loose, and you'd hear this guy giving boogie, and then he'd stop, and he'd start playing a Christian song. He'd say, John, play the boogie, play the boogie. He said, no, I gave that up because I'm giving my talent to the Lord. And John served brilliantly here. We used to have a baby grand piano in that corner. It was amazing. But anyway, that's another story. But what have you got that you're good at, that you can say, God, how can I give this up? Time, treasure, talents. What will you do? And then just simply as we close, a little story about me. And I don't like telling stories about me, but I'll never forget as a young pastor, I was stacking chairs out one Sunday. And somebody came to me and said, you shouldn't be doing that. I said, why not? He said, you're a pastor. And I said, that's why I should be doing it. I'll never forget a leadership kind of day that we had. And a guy came in, he was a pastor of another church, a fairly big church, and he was sharing that he'd gone to a midweek Bible study, and he was taking the Bible study. When he got there, there was only one other person there. It was a young man. And the young man, there were no chairs out, so the pastor said to him, come on, give me a hand to get these chairs out. And the young man looked at him and said, I'm sorry, that's not my gift. The pastor looked at him and said, I don't care what your gift is. Help me put these chairs out. Sometimes, whatever we have, we've got to just give ourselves. And by giving ourselves away, that's when I become the real me that he intended me to be. It's when you become the real you that he intended you to be. Let's stand, let's reflect in worship. Thank you.